Hi guys, my name's Dave and I thought I'll do a quick video on something I've been working on for a while. It's basically an application that connects to external APIs to retrieve stock market related data and then help visualize it on a UI. Now I've been working in financial markets for over 15 years and I've seen a lot of cool products out there. I thought I'd incorporate some of the more common features that I think are quite cool in the application.
All right, so let's take a look at the application. I'll start off by configuring a simple workspace before I go through each of the components, and then we finally touch on the APIs I'm using. As you may have noticed, it says connected to AlphaVantage up here. So I am using the AlphaVantage API for this demo. A bit of a disclaimer, I'm not endorsing any of the APIs that I'm using. I'm just using it to visualize the data in the application. So before we go on, the workspace looks a bit bare, so I'm going to right click on the workspace, split it horizontally, split the top pane vertically, and then in the commands pane I'm going to drag the quotes list and maybe the order depth and a graph below. Let's get some data into it. So the moment the application loads up, it's going to have data that it has already cached. So I've already queried these some time back. And you can see that it's broadcasting the security to the various other components. I've hard coded some data for the order depth just because the AlphaVantage API does not provide an order depth, but if there was another API that did, just hook it up and the data would flow through. So let me maybe, yeah, it's fine. So I'll query some data for JBH. All right, so the commands we've gone through, they will list all the components that I'll be adding as time goes on, and then you'll be able to just drag them across to your workspace that you've already set up. So let's go ahead and just close that down. The watch lists area allows you to create your securities or stocks that you'll be interested in, and you can create as many watch lists as you want. As the application loads up, it can be set up in two different modes. Okay, so let's go to the settings very quickly to show you the two modes. So it says polling type on startup or continuous. Because the AlphaVantage API, the free version of the API key, it allows you to request for 5 messages a minute and 500 messages a day. I don't want to continuously poll. All right, so I just paused the video to show that once you request for a quote, depending on how old the quote is, you'll have an icon next to the quote. Usually a green icon means it's within a couple of minutes. Yellow icon would indicate that it's more than that, maybe just less than, 20 minutes. Yep, and then if it's later than that, it'll turn red. And by clicking on one of these quotes, I can actually, or one of these securities, I can request for the quote. Just because I don't want to do continuous polling, which the application supports, but because if I request for more than the given number of quotes with this version of the API, I'll start getting errors back. So I'm gonna hit request, and that's the latest code, and you can see once I've got that, if I wanted to refresh it again, I could, but the application is just giving me an indication saying that it's green and the code was last updated at that time, that particular time. If I go to the API messages, so this you would probably not use, but just to give you a give you an idea as to how long these requests take. So you'll have a request and a response all being logged in, well, in logs, but just to give you a visual view of the request going to the server and then the response coming back. Okay, so let's take an example of adding an item to your existing watch list or adding a new watch list. Just let's say we'll add one called demo watch list. Is it one word, two? And then I'm going to search for PHP. And as you can see, the security search works by calling the AlphaVantage API, passing in the typed in text, and then returning a bunch of matches. And it's a global API, so you can see various securities. I'm gonna request for the Australian security, and the AlphaVantage exchange three-letter code is AUS for Oz. And once I add that in, it's gonna call the quote API and get me the latest quote. And it's as simple as that. And then basically every change you make to your watch list will be saved by default, and you can choose to disable that feature if you so wish to. You can delete watch lists if you didn't want to have that there. And yep, and there you go. You can also filter out any of the securities in the watch list just by typing it in there. Useful when you have many securities within your watch list and just want to find a particular security. So that's it for the watch list. Next I'll move on to the security list. All right, guys. So I'll quickly touch on the next couple of components. I think they're fairly quite simple to understand. You have the watch or the quotes list, which basically gives you the ability to select your watch list and then list down all the quotes for those securities, and it'll show you all the information that's being provided by the API. As you can see, the ask bid information does not come through this particular API, so it's not populated. All the tabular grids, for example, this one, would provide you some options when you right click on the column, whether you want to show all columns, you want to freeze a column from this point onwards. Let me remove that, whether you want to hide specific columns, or if you want to do that in one go for all the columns, you could go onto the column chooser and to allow you to set the visibility, freeze columns from here. If you wanted to search for a particular column, you can just type that in and then set your settings as required. The order depth is more of, like I said before, it's just a control which doesn't have the data flowing in. I've mocked up this data, but it's just to show you the depth of the order book on the exchange. If that information were to come through the API, you'd have your bids, your level 2 data coming in. The volume, I've decided to go down a graphical view of showing it as a bar with the tooltip showing you the actual volume. And yeah, so that's another standard control that you'd expect to have. And also the graphing control. So this is one that I've spent a bit of time on, but haven't, as you can see, the date formats are not, or the time formats are not correct. But the graph basically allows you to download the information that's coming from the API. You can move the graph around, so you could zoom into your graph and get a couple of lines drawn on it, move that line around if you require, and get rid of it completely. The graph also supports various properties which I wouldn't probably expose. It's just for testing purposes. As you can see, it'll provide you a bunch of options that you can go through and customize the graph as you saw fit. I'll go back to the line chart and various options for legends, etc. Yep, so these are all properties that wouldn't really expose on the UI, but it's something I needed to test the graph out when I was building it. And you have some indicators which are which I haven't hooked up as yet, although AlphaVantage does provide some of the indicators which you can look at a bit later. I'll quickly create another workspace, which is here, similar view. I'll go there vertically, and this time I'll bring in the quotes list, which we had before, and a quote overview. Show you what that's going to be like. Let's get PHP going here. Get a 1 minute graph in. Okay, so as you can see, it's telling me that may have hit the maximum quotes that I requested. It's telling me to try in a couple of minutes. There you go. All right, so let me just hide this message. Okay. So we touched on the quote list. The quote overview is really giving you a different view of the quotes. Plan to add more graphical or better visualization in here. But this particular bar shows you where the current price is compared to the 52 weekly high and low. And if this information isn't available via the API, you could add it in, which I've done for purpose of the demo. You can go to your settings, go to security information, and every time you request for a security, you'd have all that information in here. And you could basically select a security and add the information in if it wasn't available. But if you had a richer API, that information would just flow in and populate within the UI. All right, so that's a quick wrap up of the components. I'll be adding many more components in here. So these are the basic components I thought we would need in order to create this video. So thanks for watching. Stick around if you want to have a look at the APIs. I'll run through very quickly at the AlphaVantage API and the JSON format of the message that I receive, which you need to deserialize it in order to make it available to your application. All right, guys, quick look at the APIs I've been using, particularly the AlphaVantage API. So you can go into the alphavantage.co website, and then to get a free API key, just hit the link, and then you can basically fill in that, and they'll email you a key that you can plug into the application. Basically, if you go into the Premier membership, it says, well, the standard API gives you 5 API calls per minute and then 500 requests per day, whereas the other paid versions give you, there's no maximum limit. data limit, but it'll limit you to 30 calls per minute for 30, I believe that's US dollars. And likewise, they have different tiers for maximum number of calls you want to make. All right, and let's get back to, so if you wanted to have a look at what sort of data you can get back, you can go into the documentation. It's fairly straightforward. It'll give you all the API methods that they support, and as you can see here are all the indicators which I haven't set up as yet. But if you go into any one of these items, say intraday for example, it'll give you a sample. I'm using the JSON format, but you can have a CSV format, and then the JSON supports two, which is basically giving you an output size of full and the standard number of entries that will be downloaded. If you just want to have a look at the API, you can click on that, and this is the format that the data will be sent to you, and then basically use a DC realizer of some sort to convert it to the format that you want. Another API that I did find, which is quite cool, thought, is this IEX Cloud API. And they sounds like they have a similar similar service, and something that I'm gonna look into next. But for the sake of completion, if you basically have your settings, and I've selected Alpha Vantage, but as I add more, I've added a mock data if you just wanted to play around with some mock data. But if you didn't have the Alpha Vantage, I've also added Google and Yahoo, but I believe these two services are no longer in existence. But basically, when you select the particular API that you want to connect to, you'll have some information that you need to provide us, such as the URL, which is this particular URL for Alpha Vantage, and then you just basically specify the API key that you get emailed to you, and that's pretty much it.